writers and cast of X-Men Dark Phoenix, or just Dark Phoenix. Welcome to Screen Rant's Room here at New York Comic Con 2018. I'm a huge X-Men fan, and Cyclops is my favorite. And I think Cyclops and Jean have the greatest love story in all of comics. But I got to start with the hard-hitting questions type. Now, me personally, I think Cyclops has always been underused in previous movies. And he holds a lot of weight in my heart and in the source material. How is Cyclops more fleshed out this go around, and how does the events of what happens to Jean affect him throughout this film?
I mean, I guess you could say that he's one of the most, he's maybe the most affected by what happens to Jean and kind of this unraveling and what she starts to encounter and struggles to handle. And I think he's the direct, he's directly in front of that. And I think because it's, she's the one he loves, he's going to go to the end of the earth to try to save her. And I think that he and Charles kind of set out to help Jean, and throughout the movie, you start to see the X-Men kind of break apart. So I think it's a much more mature version of him. He's much more focused on getting back to Jean and helping to save her. So it's really exciting. There's also some really fragile moments with him, because when it's not easy to handle this, the fact that the one you love is maybe going crazy, or you don't know what's happening.
Ty, I hope you didn't just say the X-Men break apart, because that's going to break my heart. But Sophie, this is a very complex character. Not only is she the strongest mutant possibly in the universe, but it's also a complex role to play, because you're playing Jean and you're playing the Dark Phoenix. Can you talk to me about some of the research that went into that besides the source material?
As soon as Simon kind of told me what the movie was about, we just started straight away sharing ideas, sharing material. Simon gave me a big, thick booklet on schizophrenia. I actually found this thing online on YouTube, and it was just kind of repeating of what it sounds like being a schizophrenic. So I used to walk around town with all these voices in my head, kind of feel it out and see what it felt like. And we also explored multiple personality disorder as well, and what that feels like to kind of wake up and not know what you did, what happened, and that sheer panic of that, and how that affects you. And it's just, Jean is, this movie, she's so layered. She's so complex in this movie. And I really don't think I've done more research for a role than for this one. And I loved every minute of it. It's just, it's so layered.
Right.
So there was a lot of research that went into it. It was fun.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, Simon touched, all roads lead here. Again, kind of, because we did Phoenix once. What did you guys learn from that experience to kind of help create this experience for Phoenix?
Well, I think the biggest lesson learned from X-Men Last Stand, or X3, was that if you're going to tell a Phoenix story, tell the Phoenix story.
Sure.
Don't make it the subplot of the movie, make it the plot of the movie. So in this movie, Jean Phoenix is the absolute center, as you see her on the one sheet of the poster. She's the center. The movie is about her. The movie's about her crisis and the ways that it then affects all of the people around her, some of whom love her, some of whom see her as an enemy, some of whom want to take advantage of her. But she's at the center of it. So the lesson really we learned was tell the Dark Phoenix story the way that it was originally told, and has been told in other iterations, whether it be other versions in the comics or versions in the cartoons. She was always the center of it, and it was always about her emotional, psychological breakdown and all the things that then broke.
Now, we're also in the 1990s. Back when we started First Class, we were in the 60s. Now we're all the way up to the 90s. How are the X-Men viewed publicly by the I guess the people, the citizens?
Well, we do something in this movie when it starts that we haven't really done in the films before, which is that they are public superheroes, essentially. That they are known. They have uniforms. The world has embraced them as saviors when whatever humanity has to defend themselves doesn't work. They turn to the X-Men. And so the movie starts in this really kind of perfect place for Charles and the X-Men, and then largely because of what happens with Jean and her starting to skits out and destroy stuff, and sort of bring back the fear and hatred of mutants, the world then falls apart again, the same way that the X-Men as a family start to fall apart. And the plot of the film is, how do we save Jean's soul? And at the same time, if we can't, we may not be able to save the Earth.
It looks like we'll be taking a trip to Genosha as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are.
What informed the look of Genosha and the decision there? Because I know that in the comics, Genosha is mainly a place for mutants, kind of the precursor to Asteroid M. So can you talk to me about how you guys took some of the comic inspiration and used it for this version of Genosha?
Yeah,
Okay. I really always wanted to see Genosha on screen, and when we find Magneto, Eric, in this movie, he is at the beginnings of starting Genosha. And it is a mutant homeland, essentially like mutant. I say this as a Jew, like mutant Israel. For those of whom don't know the comics, and it is this safe place for them to go and not be judged and live by their own rules. And it's like a little paradise until Jean shows up.
Until Jean shows up. Now, here's a fun little question. I'm sure that all of you are attached to the X-Men in some form, in some way, because they're representation of what the world is, really. So if you weren't the character that you portray, or obviously you guys produce and direct, what character do you think you relate to the most, and what character would you be?
That's really interesting. Well, initially, I suppose in Apocalypse, I did relate to Jean quite a lot. I think, and I'm not just being biased, it was to do with the feeling of kind of being thrown into a world that she wasn't kind of used to, and I think in some ways being thrown into like the film industry that you're not used to, and navigating that is a difficult one. But I wouldn't say this movie I relate to her too much. I don't know what character I would say I relate to the most now. This movie is I don't think anyone could quite relate to the things that any of these characters go through in this movie, and if they have, I feel very sorry for them. So I don't know. What about you?
Jeez, I don't know. Simon, you go first.
Yeah, Simon.
I guess I would say in the context of the X-Men, maybe Charles.
Really?
Well, only in the sense of being a parent. When what?
The sense that you're our leader.
Well, there's some of that. I mean, even throwing the question to me from Ty. But I think I like to build families. It's part of the reason why I got into movies in the first place, because I liked the idea of a group of artists as opposed to being by myself in a room somewhere. And I like to create a camaraderie in that group. I don't have superpowers, but I do. I think that's what people love so much about Charles, even though he's flawed,
Sure.
as we all are. That the reason he wants to create his school, the reason he wants to create the X-Men, is to create, a little extended family that he never had, and that most of the people that come and go through the X-Men themselves never fully had. So that always appealed to me, and that still connects for me.
How about yourself?
To me, it's probably a combo of Charles and Eric. And the reason being that one of the things I love most in the comics is their ongoing unresolvable debate about, what is the better path, and the degree to which they have each strayed slightly off theirs, but they're trying to answer an unanswerable question that sits at the core of humanity, and frankly, that probably is a question we are all asking a little bit these days in our greater politics. And as a result, I love the depth with which they do that. I love the humanity that underpins where they come from, even in the more severe Eric solution. His answers to those questions are a little bit more severe. But I'm fascinated by those, and I could watch them forever, frankly.
I can watch all these movies forever, quite frankly. One last question for you, Simon. I know recently it was stated, I think it was you that said it, that Gambit is still happening, and we're going towards a more romantic comedy route. Is this that might be taken out of context from. What
No,
I've
I mean,
read.
I think with the standalone movies, meaning like Logan and Deadpool and the not mainline X-Men movies, one of the things that we've strived to do is sort of create a subgenre within the genre of the superhero movie. Obviously, Deadpool was like an R-rated comedy. Logan was very much a Western. And so we talked a lot about who Gambit is, and it's always motivated by who the character is. And we talked a lot about who Gambit is as a character, and the things that Channing relates to in the character. And so obviously he's a thief. Obviously you know his superpowers, and those things are going to be very present and prevalent in the movie. But he's also a scoundrel and a rascal and a womanizer and a lot of other things that we felt like we could explore in his relationships with women. And one of the genres that is an under service genre now is the romantic comedy.
Sure.
And so whenever we can smuggle some other genre into one of these kinds of movies, I mean, I did it way back. The first movie I ever wrote was Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and that was a romantic comedy smuggled into a spy thriller.
Right.
And so in the same way that on the surface it will be a superhero movie with, people have superpowers and things are going to explode and there's going to be car chases and all of that, and you're going to see him with the, doing all of the powers and the cards that you're familiar with. Underneath that will be romantic comedy undercurrents. And it's not really like rom-coms from like when we were growing up or when I was growing up. It's more going all the way back to like Philadelphia Story and His Girl Friday and just the kind of patter and banter of that and the fun and speed of those kinds of movies.
Well, I'm excited, and I'm also excited for Dark Phoenix. Comes out in June of 2019. Actually, I think it comes out on my birthday. So,
June
yeah,
7th?
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm super stoked about it, guys. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and enjoy New York Comic Con 2018.
Thank you.